Hey everyone, Dave here. In today's video, we're going to bake a classic rye loaf, the easiest bread recipe you can do. And I'm not talking about that technically not rye bread stuff you get with your sandwich meat at the local deli either. I mean real great tasting rye bread that looks something like this. Alright, stay tuned to find out how easy it is, and I'll throw in a few hot tips to make things even easier along the way. Let's bake! Oh man, I forgot to preheat the oven again. Before we get started, let's go over the recipe. The classic rye recipe consists of 4 main ingredients: rye flour, water, starter, and salt. And feel free to add seeds to your rye if you want to. This recipe will be using seeds, but just leave them out if you don't want to add anything. Okay, since we're discussing the recipe, let's go ahead and measure out the ingredients. For the rye flour, we're using 100% whole rye flour from Grist & Toll Flour Mill in Pasadena, California. Their flour is the best, and their link is down below. However, a rye flour from the store, that works great too. Just look for whole rye, organic rye, white or dark rye, or some version of that. Start with 500 grams of rye flour. Next, measure 475 grams of water, 225 grams of starter, and 10 grams of salt. If you're going to use seeds or berries or something, measure out as much or as little of that as you want. And today's recipe is using about 375 grams of mixed seeds and berries. My wife really loves loading up the rye loaf with lots of seeds, and this loaf is for her. Alright, that's our recipe, and now we have our ingredients measured out, so let's mix some dough. Let's get our mixing bowl and our scale. Put the bowl on the scale and press the tare button to zero out the weight. Measure out 225 grams of starter into the bowl. Then add all of the water and mix the starter and water together into a cloudy mixture using a spatula. Then add the salt and mix that in too. Here's tip number 1. If you're using seeds, now is a great time to mix them in. Adding the seeds as an inclusion now, before the flour is added, makes it better to get a good distribution into the final dough mix without straining yourself too much. The reason will become clear in just a moment. Now add the flour and mix everything together using a wooden spoon or stiff spatula. Tip number 2, rye dough has a tendency to be very sticky, and it's best not to tempt fate and use your hands. A wooden spoon or a stiff spatula will get all that mixed up without all the mess. Okay, it might take a few minutes to get everything mixed up. No worries, just keep mixing the dough until there are no dry spots left in the dough. Now grab a bread pan. I'm using a red silicone one today, but any metal bread pan about this size will do. Use a spoon or a spatula to get the dough into the bread pan. Once the dough is all in there, use the spoon or spatula to flatten and smooth out the top of the dough in the pan. This will help when evaluating the dough for readiness later. When that is done, get a plastic bag to cover the entire bread pan and dough, but leave a little extra room in case the dough expands in order to prevent it from sticking to the bag. Leave the dough out on the countertop or in a proofer or oven with the light on for up to 6 hours. Sometimes it takes that long. Next, we'll come back in a few hours to start evaluating the dough and see when it's ready. Okay, we've let the dough sit for a few hours, and now we want to take a look and see how it's doing. I think once in July one time, the dough was ready and good to go for baking. It pretty much exploded out of the bread pan in literally 3 hours. Now, when I do sourdough loaves in July, that is not an uncommon event either. But for rye breads, it's very unusual. Since rye loaves, they don't really rise that much. Okay, looking at the loaf in the bread pan, we can see it has risen a little bit, but it's not yet ready. Tip number 3, what we're looking for is cracks forming along the surface and some pinhole size holes appearing as well. When we see those, that means the dough is about ready for baking. Remember, rye doesn't rise as much as a sourdough will, so we need to validate its readiness a little bit differently. Now, it's only been a few hours and the dough is not ready yet. Let's wait at least 1 more hour and see where we are at. That took more than an hour. But now we can see that the dough has risen some more and pinhole size and some cracks have formed along the surface of the dough. This is what we were looking for. Let's go ahead and fire up the oven. Just crank it to 500 degrees for 30 minutes and make sure it's good and hot. Once the loaf is in the oven, turn the temperature down to 350 degrees and set a timer for 45 minutes. Okay, the baking is done. This looks like another great rye loaf, but we can't eat it just yet. Now we need to leave it cooling on the pan for a bit. Bonus hot tip. If you want the crust to be hard, take the loaf out of the pan after about 30 minutes or so, and then continue letting it cool down and firm up for up to 8 hours on the cooling rack. If you want the crust to remain softer, just leave it in the pan for the same amount of time before slicing. Here's how the loaf turned out. Look at that. I know my wife's going to love this loaf, and now I want to bake another one just for me. Alright, if you liked the video, please like and subscribe to my channel. Even better, hit the bell so that you're notified when I post more videos. And please leave comments down below. That lets me know that you like my content and that I should keep doing more of it. And if you have critical feedback, that's not only welcome, it's encouraged, as long as it's in good taste. That's it for this time. Take care.